Before we jump into today's episode, we just wanted to remind you that we are now live on Patreon. We'd love if you could help support us continuing making this amazing content.
And if you support us on Patreon, you'll also get early access to a bunch of cool stuff. Just go to patreon.com/so-much-crime-so-little-time or go to patreon.com and search for So Much Crime So Little Time and you'll find us. Thanks again.
In 1896 in Campbell, California, 6 people are murdered at the home of one of the town's most respected citizens.
The main suspect disappeared and was never found.
It's such a fascinating story that we're going to cover it twice.
Time for a crime battle on So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee. And in this episode and the next, we're going to do something new, a crime battle.
So what is a crime battle? Well, perhaps you've noticed that sometimes the same case is covered on multiple podcasts. But how do you know which one is worth your time? So in these 2 episodes, we'll discuss how 2 different podcasts discuss the same crime.
In this first part, we'll explore the crime itself, including where it happened and why it's such a bizarre story.
And we'll get into the first contender of our crime battle, the Dark Histories podcast.
If you haven't listened to it yet or aren't familiar with the crime, that's okay. We'll cover all you need to know.
And if you want to play along, you can check the show notes for this show as well as the next one for links to both of the podcasts we're talking about.
Or if you just want us to tell you which podcast version of this crime is worth your time, let's get to it.
See, before we get to talking about this crime battle and this story, let's jump in the time machine.
Fantastic. I will let you know, Jeff, that I tried so hard to find something for the time machine from May, the 26th of May, 1896. And all I saw was people who were born that I never heard of before, people who died that I'd never heard of before, and a movie, the first Polish movie ever made.
Okay.
That could be wrong.
I have some stuff for you that isn't any of that
Excellent.
stuff.
What
right.
are you going to rap? What words are you going to rap today?
I have
flat rap?
I have
What's
no
it
flat
called?
raps from 1896,
Flat rap.
but I do have
Oh.
some fun facts from 1896.
What do you reckon a flat rap would contain if like rap was a thing in 1896? Like what would the words be?
I presume it would be some kind of like I don't know, like vaudeville kind of thing.
What's vaudeville?
Oh my gosh, it's like traveling show, like before TV.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like
Like a
people
Punch and Judy type thing.
Yes. If I know what that is, I think I know what that is.
The 2 puppets. Actually, the
Yeah.
man just beats up the woman, to be honest.
That seems appropriate for 1896. Anyway.
Okay.
All right. So on the date this crime happened, May 26, 18. I'm gonna start slow. It's gonna get better as I go. Okay. So the least interesting one is first. Ready?
Go for it.
But on this specific day, May 26, 1896, in the Wall Street Journal, it was the first time they listed the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So the first index of stock market activity was on this date. Yep. They're going to get better.
All I have.
They're going to get better. All right. Also, I think it was in May. It was definitely around this time in 1896. The Tootsie Roll came out. How do you feel about the Tootsie Roll?
Cool. I mean, I've never had one. I've never seen one.
Wait, whoa. You've never had a Tootsie Roll?
No. You do realize there's a lot of things in your life that are solely American.
I mean, I'll be honest. I think Tootsie Rolls are kind of a trash candy, but still, they've been around since 1896. Okay, let's keep going. A few days after this crime happened, on May 30th, 1896, was the first reported car accident, which happened in New York City when a motor wagon driven by a guy named Henry Wells hit a bike. There's this woman, Evelyn Thomas, who was on her bike. I think it was a woman, Evelyn.
So you're saying it's since 1896 that motorists have been annoyed by cyclists and cyclists have been frustrated by motorists?
Yep.
That's how long ago that happened?
It gets a little better. The driver from Massachusetts, known for its terrible drivers or aggressive drivers. Let's say it that way. All right. That was, I have a couple more. I have a weird news story from around that time. So in the Midwest, in like actually on this day, so May 26th, and a couple days before and a couple days after, were a catastrophic series of tornadoes. And these were like some of the worst tornadoes ever recorded in the United States. Specifically, there was one the day after this crime happened, on May 27th, 1896. There were a bunch of, so tornadoes are categorized as F2, F3, F4, whatever. There was this one that was an F4 in St. Louis and East St. Louis in...
I was just in St. Louis.
Well,
Sorry.
That's where this happened. 255 people died. This is the third deadliest tornado in all of U.S. history. Yeah. It's pretty brutal. It only lasted a few minutes, but yeah, 255 people died. $10 million in damage was the equivalent of $366 million today in 20 minutes. 20 minutes of tornado.
That's wild.
Yeah. So.
Also, is the time machine not to bring lightheartedness to like, no?
Okay, I got two more for you.
Okay.
I'll
just sit back without my preparation and judge what you're bringing to the table.
1896 was the first modern Olympics. So obviously, like Greece had done Olympics back in ancient times. 1896, they brought it back. It was in Athens that year. A couple of fun facts about the Olympics. People who won first place didn't get gold medals. They got silver. Silver was the first prize. And
that's because silver was more... why is that? Is it because...
I don't know.
Was silver at one stage more like seen as like I feel like that was a thing for a while.
It might have been.
I'm not finishing my sentence, but it feels like silver was more valuable.
Maybe.
Did second place get gold?
Second place got copper.
And then third place got bronze?
Third place got nothing.
Oh, that's a bit mean.
They retroactively labeled them gold, silver, and bronze, but at the time it was silver and copper and nothing. One other thing about that was the first international marathon competition. So, of course, the marathon comes from ancient Greece. And specifically, so a bunch of the people who competed in this were from Greece, although the U.S. was the only non-European country to compete. There was a guy, Spiridon Balokis. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he's been dead for a long time.
What a name.
Yeah. Anyway, Greek runner. He was from Athens, ran in that marathon. Came in third place behind two other people with very Greek names. But later, turned out he covered part of the course in a carriage rather than on foot. So cheating in marathons.
Begs the question, Jeff, as someone who's ran like 17,000 marathons. Have you ever cheated in a marathon?
No, never. But
not even like a little bit.
No.
Not even like there's a corner and you could just hop over and just be a more efficient runner.
I have not. I will say that when you do run a road race, and you should always run the inside corner of every turn, because that's how they actually map the distance, the 26.2 miles. And if you're running in the middle of the road or on the far side of the road, you're running further than 26.2 miles. Over the course of 26 miles, that adds up to significant distance. This is getting in the weeds of marathon minutia that I don't think anyone cares about, but people who run.
No, I'm asleep again for the second time in a few minutes, but anyway.
Anyway,
okay.
All right, I got one last one.
Is this where you're going to sing? Or say?
Maybe. So 1896 was an election year, a presidential election year in the U.S.
Jesus.
And there's a bunch of weird parallels to...
Kind of makes sense, actually, because we've got the Olympics this year and the election this year.
Every 4 years. It's funny how that works, isn't it?
It's funny how even however long ago this is, it was still, every 4 years.
If you can count by fours, it goes all the way back to 1896. Further, actually, although not the Olympics. Anyway, in the 1896 election... This was the time when Grover Cleveland was president, but he did not choose to run. Again, he is the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. So we currently have someone running for president who is trying to serve non-consecutive terms. The only other person who's ever done that was Grover Cleveland. He decided in 1896 he wasn't going to go for a third term, which there wasn't a law against that at the time. No one had done it.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't pass that law until after FDR in the 40s. But so he chose not to run. William McKinley ran against William Jennings Bryan. So they ran in 1896. William McKinley won. Same ticket was on the ballot again in 1900. So McKinley won, but then Bryan ran again in 1900. So we had the same two guys again, which sounds a little bit familiar. McKinley won again in 1900, and then he gets shot in 1901. So weird pellet.
This feels all a bit too weird right now.
It's a little weird, right?
Did he die when he got shot?
So funny, yes, but not immediately.
Funny thing is, yes. Sorry, that's not funny.
Not funny for him. He did die, but it took, I think, 8 days for him to die.
Jesus.
Yeah,
that's a long time to be suffering.
Well, it's that time. So anyway, that's the super long time machine.
All right, so what is Dark Histories about? Its official description is it tells stories of history's darkest moments, deepest mysteries and strangest happenings, from large cultural events to smaller, more localized legends. There's bi-weekly episodes on historical mysteries, murders, and cultural oddities.
So the show does single episode stories, and it's hosted by a guy named Ben, who by day is a hairstylist. By night, he is a podcast host. He has a background in history and sociology. He has a dog named Captain Bigglesworth. So, and he's from Brighton, England.
That's what you said. So, yeah, as if you had more to say about the name Captain Bigglesworth.
I just think it's a great name for a dog.
I love when I hear dogs' names like this, and because what I imagine immediately is being in a park and your dog not listening to you and you're trying to call them back and Captain Bigglesworth.
Do you think he says the full name every time?
Oh, I'd say if the dog hears the full name, the dog is back straight away.
That's great.
Do you reckon when it's not the full name, when it's more like of an endearing name, does he call him Captain or Bigglesworth or Biggles?
I think it's Captain.
Captainworth.
All right. This episode came out in August 2019. This is from season 3 of Dark Histories, episode 16. It is called James Dunham and the McGlincy Murders. It's about an hour long. And that's the one we're going to talk about here.
So we're going to get into the discussion about the McGlincy murders. In brief, 6 people were murdered in a household on one night in May of 1896, and the murderer escaped into the mountains and disappeared forever.
All right, Dee. So before we talk about how Dark Histories handles this, let's talk about this story. What stands out to you about this story?
Like the plot points? Are we talking plot points first? Or format or host? Where do you want to go first?
I thought we want to talk about the story itself and then come back and talk about...
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's totally fine. I had my notes organized slightly differently. So.
I think that gives it more context because then people like...
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As you said, we're going into battle, so got to have it prepped. Okay. This is a fascinating story. I feel like at every stage, at every time in history, you have a story similar to this in terms of or elements that are similar to this. So, for example, he marries into Dunham. James Dunham marries into to the McGlincy family. He marries Hattie, who's the daughter of McGlincy's wife, not his own daughter. And
right, McGlincy's stepdaughter, right? Because McGlincy gets married a couple times, and he
yeah,
right.
And the family don't love him. Her mates don't love him. Everyone's like, no, he's a bit of a bad egg, like not into him. That kind of thing happens all the time. And unfortunately, we often see stories of people having that vibe about someone and then them turning around and doing something violent to one or many members of the family. I feel like that's a story we hear throughout history.
Yeah, like you wonder if he had been more kind of welcomed into the family or not seen as such kind of an outsider. Like it seemed like he had built up a lot of resentment towards this family, and then that obviously manifested itself in the most violent possible way. Didn't have to go that way, but...
Exactly. So the Dunhams moved to San Jose. The McGlincys moved to Campbell. Both of these towns are within Santa Clara County.
Yes.
And they're bordering each other.
Yes.
And basically the daughter of one family, the McGlincy family, marries the son of the other, the Dunham family. And things are going not so well for the new couple.
Yeah, not so great, right? Like I think it's kind of sad. Like it seems like Dunham tried to kind of make the best of it. He tried a bunch of businesses. Like one of them was candy making and like a lemonade stand, and then he's in like a pre-law program. Like he's trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life and how he wants to make a living, and nothing seems to be working for him.
Yeah, and it's a bit sad because, as you said, maybe if he was welcomed into the family more, maybe things would have gone differently. But the other thing is, even in terms of the marriage itself, Hattie, Dunham's wife, had previously been engaged to his younger brother, Charles. Charles ran off with someone else, and people thought maybe to spite Charles, Hattie got with James and ended up marrying him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird twist, isn't it?
It's a weird twist, but what it also is, it's noted that James wasn't particularly good looking. He didn't have much going for him, and it felt, as I said, like a step down. What it does, I feel, is it puts James working from it puts him down immediately. It's like he's always trying to prove himself because nobody thinks he's good enough.
Yeah.
Even maybe his wife didn't want him. His wife actually wanted his brother. So he's always trying to prove himself and compare himself to other people. It's not a good start for the relationship, it would seem.
Can I add one thing to that? There's a little nugget that's mentioned in this podcast about his mother-in-law. So Colonel McGlincy's wife is named Ada. She apparently keeps a list of his failings as a husband in like her diary, which I don't know. I have a mother-in-law. If I found out that she was logging my failings as a husband, yeah, that'd be real rough. I'd probably be real upset about that.
I get that, but it was noted that it might have been as a way to help her daughter have grounds for divorce.
Right. Sure.
I totally understand that, but you also have to remember that they moved in with Hattie's mum and stepdad. And so her mother must have been witnessing, and there's notes from different people of how badly he treated Hattie. So if you actually see someone being mistreated, I feel like noting it isn't bad. I feel like for someone who's not a terrible human being, just trying their best in this world, in a relationship, living with your in-laws, it would be really bad if you were to hear of all the things they think you're failing at. Totally understand that.
Yeah.
It's not going to feel good. But Jeff, if you did find out that your mother-in-law was writing down and chronicling all... that word was weird.
Chronicling?
Yeah. Is that a word?
That's
I feel
a
like
word,
it is a
yeah.
word, but it just sounds really weird. All of your misgivings and all of your perceived failures as a husband. Are you going to do what Dunham does?
Am I going to murder 6 people?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there's really no circumstances in which I find myself murdering 6 people with an axe and with a gun.
As I was asking, I was like, I really hope he's going to say no, because
Yeah.
otherwise this is awkward.
It's a hard
But, like,
no on that.
I mean, of course. So I can see why she did it. I can understand like being like, oh, if I heard someone was doing that to me, I wouldn't be happy about it. Of course you wouldn't be happy about it. Don't take an axe to your father-in-law's head.
So yeah, so we obviously okay. So we don't know all of the, it's possible to know all of the circumstances of what's going on in 1896 within this family. We get these little bits and pieces, right? Like we get that he had this friction with the family, like he was struggling in terms of finding where you want to go. You want to say something? I can see you wanting to jump in, and I'm just going to keep talking until you do.
I mean, yeah, I feel like you're giving him a little bit too much leeway here. He worked for the family in order to like earn their keep in the house.
No.
He went up a ladder, fell down, and then sued them. He's living in their house. Like, are you joking?
I'm not.
Let's not give him any leeway here.
I want to be perfectly clear. I'm not defending the guy who murdered 6 people.
It feels a little bit like you're being defensive of him.
No, what I'm trying to say is, I'm
trying was you're like, I'm trying to say it, but you won't let me speak. I've heard that trying before.
What I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of kind of things in the soup of this household going on, right? Like there's a lot of dynamics at play. None of it justifies murdering 6 people. But what I'm trying to say is we don't know all of the things that precipitated this event. And that's actually brought up in this podcast about like, we really don't know why he did it exactly. Like we have clues, but like one of the clues that we haven't mentioned yet is he had a history of violence that extended back to, it sounds like his childhoodish, somewhere where he was strangling like chickens in order to get what he wanted. Like some weird stuff.
Yeah, and actually once before he married Hattie, he used to go back to his parents looking for money because he was out spending all his money, and he would like kill, I think it was at that stage, he would kill the mother's chickens until she would relent and give him money.
So this would be what we would call a red flag, right? Like in this.
I mean, a little bit. He also got away with it, which really frustrated me. He attempted to kill a previous foreman on one of the sites he worked. Is it foreman or boss? He attempted to kill a former boss of his. He attempted to strangle the boss, and he basically was fired. That was the way the police decided to deal with it. Even though after he like walked away, he said he had wished he was able to kill the guy. Maybe it would have been a good idea to lock him up.
Yeah, well, hindsight, sure. I don't know. Okay.
I feel like if you try and strangle someone, there's questions that we need to ask.
Nope, absolutely. But I mean, it's also like it's such a different. This is the first time we've talked about a crime from the 1800s. Like it's a very different time. This is when Silicon Valley, instead of being a bunch of tech companies, was a bunch of like fruit trees and stuff, right? Like it's funny. Like I did want to say that, you know, talking about this area, because I had read a book earlier, years and years ago, about Sarah Winchester and the Winchester Mystery House. Have you been to the Winchester Mystery House?
Yes, we went to a pumpkin patch there our first year here with the kids.
Okay, so I've
dressed as Elmo and Cookie Monster.
Wait, you were Elmo or were you Cookie Monster?
No, the kids were Elmo.
What were you dressed as?
Me.
Okay. So I've actually never been to the Winchester Mystery House. I've been across the street from it 1,000 times.
In Santana Row.
I was there yesterday. But
I mean, it feels like you should go.
I know. My family went without me one time. Actually, funny enough, when my mother-in-law was in town, they went to the Winchester Mystery House, and I was at work, so I missed it. Not that I'm bitter. I did read a whole book about it.
Sounds like you're the one chronicling. I can't say that word. It's really hard to say.
My point is,
chronicling.
Sarah Winchester was alive around the same time that this happened, and this was, and so the Winchester Mystery House is technically in San Jose, but it's right next to Campbell. Like it's literally feet away from the border of Campbell. And one thing I learned that I thought was interesting. Well, your mileage may vary on how interesting this is. So now this whole area is all like Silicon Valley tech companies, really expensive stores and malls and things.
Houses.
Yes, very expensive houses. But back then it was all orchards, right? Like this whole area was all orchards. But now, like, it's funny, like I drive around and I see things like the podcast alludes to like McGlincy being a name of like a street. But there's also like the prune yard is one of the main locations in Campbell, but that's named after the prunes that were grown here. And
Mm-hmm.
like in Sunnyvale or in Santa Clara, there's like Cherry Orchard Shopping Plaza where there's a good Trader Joe's, and but that's because that used to be a bunch of cherry orchards, right?
Okay, so he's not on good terms with his family, as we've noted. He had some. There was a lot of situations in his past, as we noted, where he was aggressive and he was showing signs of aggression. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, his father-in-law and brother-in-law were out at some meeting some night to give out about
Immigrants.
immigrants.
An anti-immigrant group, which can we pause for a second there? An anti-immigrant group where everyone there is themselves an immigrant. Like,
Yes, indeed, that is what they were doing. And so they're out having a nice quiet evening, and when they come home, they are greeted with horror. While they are out, James Dunham shoves something down the throat of Hattie and then snaps her neck to kill her. A domestic servant, Mimi, who was hired to help with the child rearing, was also murdered brutally, as was Hattie's mother, his mother-in-law. And then he sits calmly. He removes all the photographs from the house of himself, and he waits calmly until his wife's brother and father return, and he kills them both with an axe.
yeah. Yeah.
And then he escapes by a saddleless horse. And really, that was the start of an endless search to chase Dunham down. Was it 3 sheriffs over 3 decades?
It was
No Dunham
definitely,
was ever found.
multiple sheriffs over, quite a few years where they kept looking for him and kept having clues and sightings, and not just in the local area, but spread out over the country, right? Like there was,
Mm-hmm.
but they never found him. Yeah.
No. And like really that's the crux of the story. There's lots of bits of that this podcast itself goes into different fake leads, etc. Like the sheriff having an awful time, people not being too happy with the sheriff, and then eventually him giving up, someone else taking over. He wasn't re-elected. It's a whole thing. Well, we're not going to get into
Electing
the
sheriffs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say one of my favorite false leads was about the guy who claimed he spotted him, and then turns out he was just trying to impress a girl. Like what a weird move that is.
I'm just like, what girl is going to be like, oh my God, you saw Dunham? That's amazing. Like, what? How is that impressive?
If you did this whole show in that accent, we'd have to end this series.
Fair. But yeah.
But then another maybe false lead, was this guy, and I think it's the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is just south of Campbell, comes across this house that's like painted green to kind of blend into the woods. He goes inside. The person who lived there had disappeared, but he finds newspaper clippings all about this case. So it's like either this was Dunham hiding very close to Campbell for years and years, or it was some other person who just happened to be obsessed with this case, which, I mean, both things are possible, but just real weird. Like, that's a weird...
It is weird. And then you get your man, what's his name, Cripps or Krill?
His name is Krill. Yeah, C-R-I-L-L.
So we're
Krill.
20 or so years later, and this guy Krill is found. And he's identified. And is he in... Oh, God, I don't know. There's lots of I places in this country. Is he in Idaho?
Iowa. I think it was
Iowa.
Yeah.
Iowa was also in my head. It was between Iowa and Idaho. I mean,
Sure.
who knows? I don't know where either of them are. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Anyway, he's basically convinced, come with me. He's taken in by someone. He's the sheriff there. This is so irrelevant. We don't need to get into this. Ignore all this. He's brought to Campbell on the pretense that people think that he is in fact Dunham. He's put into prison there, and people who knew Dunham were asked to come and see him. So remember, Dunham stole all of the photographs of him around the house. There was only one, I think they called it a tin something photograph, which I didn't really understand.
Yeah, some old-timey type of photograph. Yeah, but he took most of the... This
Not a
I
very
mean,
clear photograph.
no, but I think it's worth noting, and you alluded to this, but like that's a clever move for this guy, right? Like, especially at the time in
Very
1896,
clever.
like that's the equivalent of erasing your hard drive and removing everything from the cloud, which is a lot harder to do
Especially
now.
when so many people seem to look similar back then. So
I
this
mean,
guy, Krill,
yeah, mustache and a fancy
and a
hat, and
hat.
yeah,
Away with you. So this guy Krill apparently looked really similar to him. So he's brought to Campbell, and people are asked to come over and see him and see if they think that it is him. And you had people coming over saying definitely him. Other people saying I have no idea if it's him or not. I can't guarantee it.
well,
And
because
then
years
they
have also gone by at this point.
yeah, they're like, oh, it might be him. He just looks a bit older, which yeah, because it's years later. And then they get the priest, Krill, the priest that married Krill.
Yeah,
And he comes in like a costume, basically. So
love this
he
part.
doesn't
Yeah.
know, he can't see who he is. And he asks Krill very specific details of his wedding. And Krill apparently knew them all.
Yeah.
So the priest took off his costume and said, "It is I, the priest who married you. I free you because I can tell that you're not lying," basically.
Yeah. Did you look at these two pictures of Krill next to Dunham?
They looked really similar. So it's up on Dark Histories Instagram, which was really cool.
Yeah.
You should link that.
They look similar, but they also look like every other guy from this time period.
Well, this is my point. And
yeah.
the other thing is, with time passing, I think it's really easy to think, of course I'd notice them, I'd recognize them, whatever. But you're talking about years passing, and we don't have social media or even cameras to take photos of people and to see them constantly. So it'd be very easy to forget.
I sometimes think about what is it, The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, where he
Love
like, at the
Harrison
beginning-
Ford.
it's a great movie. But at the beginning of it, he like shaves his beard and I think he like dyes his hair, but it's like he still looks like Han Solo and Indiana Jones. And it's like, and I understand that's because he is a famous actor person, but like
A famous actor person.
beard or no beard, like I'm gonna remember this guy and I'm gonna recognize this guy, right? Like, and that happens in a lot of movies. And like the beard is the big thing. Like if this guy just goes and shaves his mustache or grows out his full beard, like he's unrecognizable, right? Like gets a different hat. Like especially after years and years go by, like who's to say it's that guy or not that guy?
The other thing is, maybe he went to, like, it's said that he had so much money on him. Maybe he made it to Iowa and both the sheriff and the priest were in on it. And he said, I have this money. I'm going to give it to you. You're going to bring me over there. We're going to clear it all together. At least then they'll know it's not me. And the priest is going to do it as well.
Wow.
He's
So
paying the
that-
priest. So he says, like, say that I've been married and blah, 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 blah.
That's
then
actually pretty clever.
He's,
That wasn't in the podcast. That's a little insight from D there. I like that one.
yeah. I mean, it feels doable. I feel like a lot of people can be bought.
He had a lot of money too,
He did.
right? Like I think in the equivalent of today's dollars, it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars on him.
600,000, I think they said.
Yeah, which is, I mean,
Which is
that's a lot of
before
money.
he's set up somewhere. But then
Right.
also, he's not very good with money by the sounds of it. So
But still.
anyway, we'll get into this.
Anyway. All right. So D, anything else you want to say about the story itself? We're going to come back to this in our next episode, but anything from this Dark Histories podcast about this particular story before we talk about Dark Histories?
No, I don't think so. I think that's kind of all I have to say.
All right, so let's transition into talking about Dark Histories like as a show and what are our thoughts on this show. So when we usually talk about this, and I mean this is a crime battle, I feel like the crime battle comes down first and foremost to the host. What do you think of Ben, hairstylist, dog owner, historian?
So the last 10 minutes or so of him chatting through the story. So he tells the story in the first 50 or so minutes, and
Yeah.
then the last 10 minutes or so is him talking about like his opinion and blah blah blah. That last 10 minutes, I really liked that. I enjoyed him chatting through that part. I was kind of wondering when I heard that change of pace, the change of tone, you know, removing himself from like the storytelling, but really kind of saying, oh, this is what I was thinking at this part, and I found this part interesting. I was wondering how the entire podcast would be different if he embedded that throughout the story.
Yeah. Yeah, because most of this is done in a style I think we've only heard in Black Girl Gone, where it's a single person talking, no real like sound effects or music. It's scripted. He's just kind of like reading his story. It's like he wrote this all out as a paper and now he's reading it to us, except for those last like 10 or so minutes where he's just sort of speaking more candidly about what he thinks. I don't know if I agree with you that it would have been good to intersperse that. I do think it was a little dry and I had a little trouble staying focused. Like he did a very subtle shift as he would jump around in time. Like he was telling the whole story, but then he would jump back and give backstory, and he'd do that in kind of a different like audio quality. Like it was a different sound to it, but it was subtle, right? Like, and I almost wanted that to be a little bit more dramatically contrasting than it was.
Yeah, I just felt like I just didn't find it very engaging, to be honest. Part of me thought that some of it was a little bit too flowery or spent too much time describing things that I really don't care about. I'm also such a visual person that I feel like I need nearly a character map to figure out what the hell was going on. Like at one stage I was like, what are we talking about, all these different families moving in? Because it was the families and who's setting up the whole area and blah, blah, blah. And from a historical point of view, I'm sure some people found that very interesting. But for me, I didn't feel like there was nuggets of, the reason I'm telling you this is because, I don't know. The
You as a
start got
person
me.
who doesn't care about history. Is that what you're
Me?
saying? Is that what you're saying?
That I'm a person that doesn't care about
It
history.
sounds like that's what you're saying.
It's not that I don't care about history, but I feel like if you're going to tell a story, this exact story, word for word, you need to change up your voice, you need to set the scene, and you need to be very explicit when you're switching to families. So it's very easy to not hear Dunham family name, McGlincy family name. At the start, it was talking about just how San Jose was set up itself and like
Right.
what brought people here.
Well,
And
I
I felt personally when I was listening to the podcast, I listen to a lot of podcasts in different ways. Whether I'm walking or cleaning or whatever I'm doing, I'm listening to a podcast. And even if I'm not sitting down trying to make sure I hear every word, I can still be aware of what's happening. And this one, I just felt it was much harder to do.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that, actually. I'm giving you some grief, but I agree with you. I think the hard thing in particular is it's not just about, we've listened to other stories where it's about, two people in some type of violent encounter. But this is one guy who murders 6 people, and then there's a couple of other people who don't get murdered, but we also get a little bit of the like multi-generational, like how the McGlincy family got there. So there's a lot of names in a short span of time, right? Because again, this is also where, if this was spread out over 6 episodes and we'd have one episode focused on like the history of the family and one episode on, the victims and one episode on Dunham, like that would be different. But we're getting in 40, 50 minutes all of the people related to the McGlincy Dunham families, the sheriff, all the different people who pursued it.
But did you feel like that was done well here?
I think it was a lot. I think particularly at the beginning, like the backstory about the McGlincy family, at a couple times I had to go back because I wasn't sure who he was talking about.
And that's my point. So if we're talking really quickly in that 50 minutes, and obviously he's like, okay, 5 minutes to scene setting and what's the historical background, 5 minutes to the McGlinskys, 5 minutes to the Dunhams, and then like let's like marry it all together, literally. I think it just could have been more explicit, even if a line or two, or as you said, like a different use of like
one of your accents that you do. Is that what you're suggesting?
I found it was one voice telling the story, but there was no color in his voice. So
Well, yeah.
I don't know.
Can I bring up something? So the other podcast I think was most similar to this in form was Black Girl Gone, where again it was one woman's voice. It was, I think she had kind of the same intonation throughout the whole story, but I think that was more a matter of how she structured the story, right? I think she kept it very logically laid out so that it was very, I think, easy to keep track of who was who in the story.
But very bare bones as well. Like, it was very much, I'm leaving a lot of the detail out because I know that I'm going monotone here. It's
What did
very
you say
bare
about that?
bones because she knew she was like one voice telling the story. So she wanted to make sure people could keep up. That's one of the reasons I really liked Black Girl Gone.
Yeah, I agree.
But this
I'm
was
curious
too
to see-
much
yeah.
information. We could have been pared back.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right. Anything else you want
If
to say
you
about Dark
listened,
Histories?
I presume you haven't listened to Three Castles Burning, the podcast, because it's a social history podcast about all these stories relating to Dublin, Ireland, the capital city of Ireland, Dublin, where I'm from.
Never been
I know. Well, look, it's on your true crime.
there. Tourism list.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll get there
Although
eventually.
it's not actually.
We haven't actually done a Dublin story yet.
I've got one for you. But anyway, it's really good, right? It's not just true crime. It's loads of different episodes about loads of different things. It's one voice telling, historical fact, lots of different pieces, bits and pieces. And I had to listen to it today because I said, this podcast reminds me of that. But I feel like I was more engaged with Three Castles Burning. So I listened. It's the intonation of the voice. It's bringing the character and the charisma. Like, I've been in trainings before where people are deadpan and not engaging, or classes or lectures or whatever. I've also been in them where people are and they're just using their voice, but they're really drawing you in with the intonation and the character and really painting a picture for you. And that's missing here. And I feel like when you're going fact heavy, you have to go... I'm not talking about creating drama. Like, this story is dramatic in itself.
Sure.
But just with your voice, you need to keep people interested. And I just felt we were lacking here with that.
I will say this. I was listening to about the middle of this episode as I was driving up and down the 101 in Silicon Valley.
Driving down the 101, California, here we come.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I had to pull into the IKEA parking lot in East Palo Alto. And shout out to IKEA East Palo Alto. And I realized I had to pause it because while I was trying to navigate that god-awful parking garage, I wasn't going to be able to keep paying attention and following the story. And yeah, I feel like that's an indicator of, like, I knew that I couldn't drive a complicated drive and not hit someone and still be following along well enough to talk about this show.
Yeah. I will also say, I think there's people out there that enjoy the way that this is produced. Like, my husband, I would say, would love this. He's way more into, like, factual, less emotive storytelling or people.
Sounds like a weird shot. I don't know why it does. Like, you're saying something nice and it...
No, I absolutely am. I
Yeah.
know. I think it's the less emotive makes him sound like a robot, which he's absolutely not. I and genuinely, I think I would give this podcast, I think I would listen to another episode of Dark Histories just to hear, I think it's always good. You don't judge it on one. I wouldn't do that. But I'm not completely off it. I'm just not confident it's for me. I feel like the percentage split between this is story dense with factual information versus this is my opinion on the story of it.
Yeah.
It's just not what I would usually go for. But I am the more emotive, more into opinions and like hearing the chats behind a story as opposed to like fact.
All right. So as we wrap up this round one of this crime battle, it seems like Dark Histories is coming in as the underdog, but I think it remains to be seen.
Remains to be seen. I'm excited to see the contender.
before we get to our true crime question of the week, we just want to pause right here and remind everyone, if you are enjoying this show, please support us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and search for So Much Crime, So Little Time, and we would love it if you do. Thank you.
Alrighty, Jeff. True crime question of the week. Did we say we're going to go with the Dunham one on the run?
Mm-hmm.
I felt like some of the other ones were funny too, but anyway. Okay.
But I think
Jeff.
that's the one that's the most
relevant.
true crime-ish.
I really enjoyed the one, if someone was to marry you to get back at your younger brother or marry you for money. Which would you rather? I quite enjoyed that one. Anyway. Jeff. True crime question of the week. If you were Dunham and on the run, would you hide out nearby to keep an eye on the chaos that you caused, or get as far away as possible?
So we touched on this in this recap, but we didn't really get into the details of what like half of this podcast is about like, did he stay nearby, like within a few miles, or did he go to Mexico or Iowa or wherever? And like the prevailing wisdom seems to be that he went to Mexico and just disappeared. He spoke Spanish. And once you get across the border, like presumably you're just disappeared. You're never going to come back. I think that's the right move. I would 100% go as far away as possible. Like, I feel like the closer you stay, the more likely that someone's going to recognize you. That just like, it's so much riskier to stay nearby. Like, it's a big world. Like, go far, right? Like, you got the money. I feel very strongly about this.
Okay. So if you were Dunham, you'd do that. Like, I mean, I think so too. But if you're Dunham, I did preface that. That question is if you were Dunham. He is a complete narcissist. He's a complete...
I mean, I think murderous psychopath, I think. I mean,
okay. So...
brutally murders 6 people.
Yeah. So is it not proven that people like that enjoy seeing the aftermath of the chaos that they caused?
So we do know that arsonists return to the scene of the crime more than I think any other type of criminal.
But don't we also know that serial killers, like, there's a reason why people try not to use their name when they're talking about victims or survivors. They're trying to,
use the killer's name?
Yeah.
I think that's different. I think that's more just like trying to not give attention to
infamy or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think I could be wrong about that. So you're saying if you think Dunham, I thought you were asking about like what I would do.
Well, I said if you were Dunham.
Yeah, I'd take my money and run.
I mean, me too, but like, I just don't know if Dunham would, though. Because if I was Dunham, I'd be a murderous psychopath who's a narcissist. So
he does seem really kind of caught. Like, there's a couple other things we didn't mention, like the note in the jar that's found years later, I think in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where it suggests that he committed suicide. And he talks about how he could have killed it's like a note to the sheriff, basically saying like, I could have killed you so many times. Like, you don't know how lucky you were. And like, they think he maybe killed himself somewhere in the mountains, and they never found his body. There's a couple of bodies that get found or sort of found, and maybe it was him. Yeah, I think I'm here. I hear what you're saying. I could see him doing that. He makes some real weird. The other weird move that we didn't talk about that I think is maybe relevant to this question is where he leaves a fake suicide note for his wife,
but then doesn't kill her by any means that looks like potentially she killed herself. Doesn't.
Also, like, the whole thing doesn't make sense. So yeah, he does some real weird illogical things.
It does seem like he's not a logical character. So if you're not going to be logical, where are you going? Maybe he went the wrong way and he went to Iowa. Where's Iowa? Is that center?
Iowa is in the middle of the country. Yes.
Okay.
If he went to Iowa, he was definitely going the wrong way. But also, like, Iowa is really far away from Campbell. So the odds of someone, I guess someone did find someone there who looked like him. So that didn't work out if he did that. But
I don't know.
like, okay, So Mexico is a logical place to go. It's across the border. It's the closest border. One thing that's brought up in this podcast that it's funny, I think he says at the end where he talks about his own thoughts, the host of the show, and he says, call in or let me know if you think like getting to Mexico is harder than it sounds. And I feel like people who aren't from California or have never been to California don't have a sense of how big this state is and how like far away Mexico is from Silicon Valley. Like it's real far.
I was thinking this as well. Also because I feel like anyone who hears about California believes that everyone's living in LA.
Right.
And you're like, no, Northern California.
Like how far do you
very
think
far away
LA is by either? So he traveled by horseback without a saddle or by bicycle. He was also big into bicycles. Like
your arse would be killing you horseback without a saddle.
Right? Like it's incredibly far. Like it's and this is going to be
8 hours
driving to Mexico.
It would be 8 hours to Mexico or 8 hours to San Diego.
Yeah, well, San Diego is almost to Mexico, and that's driving in a modern car on modern
the
roads.
101.
Yeah,
singing
on the interstate.
OCs theme tune.
Yeah, well, I would probably take the 5, but yeah, and that's also you got to deal with the LA traffic, and I mean, I presume even in the 1890s, the LA traffic was brutal. I don't know. Would you take the coastal highway? Would you take Route 1 along the coast?
Yeah, I think so.
Through Santa Barbara? I mean, Santa Barbara's beautiful.
Prettiest. Yeah, it is pretty.
But you could also go through Paso Robles, stop at Firestone Walker, get some good wine.
Go up to Dow.
You could go to Pismo. Oh, there's a great cinnamon roll place in Pismo.
We got from Tootsie Rolls to cinnamon rolls.
On our next show, we'll conclude this crime battle with the Crime Capsule podcast version of the McGlincy murders.
Compared to Dark Histories, is Crime Capsule's version better, worse, different, interesting, unique, tedious, captivating, compelling, complementary, conflicting, conclusive, confusing, confounding, coniferous, configurational? You're a fecker.
I just kind of want to know which one is better.
That's on the next So Much Crime.
So Little Time. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.